Question, when doing Naihanchi-Dachi, do you bring or tense the adductor muscles in the inner thighs? So, Naihanchi-Dachi has a lot of nuance and detail to it, right? And a lot of people don't do it properly, and a lot of people don't understand what they're doing. If you are engaging the inner thighs of your legs, usually what that's trying to do is bring your legs together, right? That's generally what those are meant to do. And in this posture, that's going to bring your knees inward. You don't want to pull your knees inward when you're doing this, because you're pulling them out of alignment then. You also don't want to do the opposite and pull your knees outward, because you're going to put a lot of strain on your joints. So the trick to this is a balance, right? You have to have enough tension on the outside and the inside to maintain this line of structure. And the reason for that is when I use this stance to rotate my hips, from the perspective of being in front of me like you are now, it looks like my knees are wiggling. What's actually happening, if you were to look down, is my knees are tracking in line with my toes. Just like they would be if I went into Shikodachi and bent my knees. But because I have turned my legs at the hip, and I'm maintaining enough tension to keep my knees in line in this direction, everything tracks properly. So you don't put too much strain on your knees, you don't put too much strain on your ankles, and you have a lot of this rotational movement available to you, which is what it's really meant to help you develop, is rotational power, right? So hopefully that helps answer that question. It can be a very nuanced discussion trying to work on the mechanics of Naihanchi. I thought the outer edges of the feet were parallel in that stance. That is a stylistic preference. So Naihanchi-Dachi is usually having the feet oriented so that either the outside edges are forward or 45 degrees inward or somewhere in between, depending on your style. So some styles, very adamant, the outside edges point straight forward, which does technically orient them slightly inward. But personally, I don't find this to be a very good structure for rotational power, because it's very difficult to rotate and keep your knees tracking over the toes when they're pointed forward. And some cases, the 45 degrees inward has the same kind of problem. So personally, I'm a big fan of making your karate fit you, not the style. You shouldn't have the same karate as your instructor does, unless you are built identically and have the exact same mentalities and preferences in methodology, right? So find a position that works for you. When it comes to Naihanchi-Dachi, the general measurement between your feet is meant to be the length of your shin plus a fist, and then it's your heel. That's usually how far apart your stance should be in Naihanchi-Dachi. But for some people, this is too narrow. And for some people, it's too wide. So you have to experiment and find one that fits you. And the same thing applies with how far in you turn your feet. The important thing is that you establish a structure that lets you do this rotation with your knees tracking over your toes without any pain in your knees or your ankles. So it is unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all answer. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. And hip positioning upwards, nutation or counter nutation, eliminating lumbar spine curve when. So the hip thing, I believe you're talking about pelvic tilt. Nutation is actually a word that I'm not familiar with, but I believe you're talking about pelvic tilt. You should try to maintain a neutral spine position with Naihanchi. There are other kata, such as sanchin, where you try to straighten the spine. There's value in both, right? The thing about Naihanchi And having a neutral spine means, and you're not going to be able to see it very well, right? But you don't stick your butt out, you tuck your butt in a bit, right? So that you take some of the curve out of your spine, but you can still very easily rotate, move, and whip if you needed to. In something like Sanshin, it's the same stance but staggered, and usually there is much more emphasis on bringing the front of the pelvis up, straightening the spine even more. Now, doing that really engages your core to connect your upper body to your lower body, which is important because if you are trying to transfer power, as in with a punch, you generate the power from the ground up through your legs, right? And you rotate your hips, and then you need to rotate your shoulders. But what actually connects your shoulders to your hips? Right? We've got direct connections between our foot, our ankle, our shin, our knee, our femur, our hip. All that is connected with joints. The only joints that connect our hips to our shoulders is our spine. And when there's a curve in it, it doesn't rotate quite as efficiently. And if your core is not engaged, then when you hit something solid, you could end up getting pushed back and losing power. So engaging your core in that way helps to connect your upper body to your lower body with the musculature that's in between. And that's called gammaku. This whole area is your gammaku area.